I'm Sari.
And I'm Haley.
And this is Seamwork Radio. Welcome back to Seamwork Radio, where we share practical ideas for building a creative process so you can sew with intention and joy. So Haley's out on parental leave with her new baby right now, so I'm going to be flying solo and giving you some really practical tips and tricks. And we've also got a whole bunch of interviews lined up with some pretty incredible guests from the world of sewing that you will not want to miss this summer. So stay tuned for that, and we'll welcome Haley back in the fall. Today, we're talking about 5 books on creativity that have totally transformed the way I think, and even in some cases, really have just changed my whole life. So we're going to cover one book that helped me create rituals that I've been practicing for years, one that helped me understand how to get into a creative mode more easily, and one that's a really practical workbook for building more creative time into your life. So you don't want to miss these. All right, so let's talk about this a little bit. I've always been just really interested in the concepts behind creativity, where it comes from, how we can feed it, how we can get more of it in our life, and how it really affects the way we think. And why is that? I personally think that humans are just really meant to be creative. It's sort of our defining characteristic as human beings, if you think about it. We got to where we are through our ability to problem solve, to make unexpected connections, to try brand new things, to see how things work. I think that is just something that defines us as human beings. And because we evolved to do that, I think we're happiest when we do it. So just like a horse is meant to run or a cat is meant to hunt, I think humans really need to exercise their creativity in order to be fulfilled. We have to fill that evolutionary purpose, I think, in order to really, really feel good. But there's a lot that gets in the way of that, especially in our modern lives, which can become just so very routinized and overwhelming, I think, at least for me. And I think that's one reason that a lot of people turn to things like shopping and social media. I actually think it kind of scratches part of that creative itch by making you feel inspired or giving you ideas or helping you dream of possibilities. But then it just sort of ends there because you don't actually get to create something out of it with your hands the way we're meant to do. You're just really consuming. And that's how I think about creativity these days. And it's one of the reasons that I think really incorporating skills like sewing into your life can be so powerful. So today I'm going to share 5 books that have helped me to think differently about creativity and actually motivated me to make more time for it in my life. So if that's something that you struggle with, or this is just a subject that interests you and you want to learn more about how to be more creative, how to incorporate it more into your life, I think you're really going to enjoy some of these books. And there's a nice variety of them. So depending on kind of where you are and what your questions are, what would be helpful for you, I think you'll find something useful in here. All right, so let's get into these books. So the first one that I would like to mention is called Steal Like an Artist, and it's by Austin Kleon. And I'm sure many of you have heard of Austin Kleon, or you've read this book, or you've seen this book, and I absolutely love this book. So if you are not familiar with him, I would really recommend checking out his blog and his newsletter. We can link those in the show notes. His newsletter is one of my absolute favorite newsletters, and it has been for years and years. He just finds the most interesting things, writes about the most interesting ideas, connects things in really, really creative ways. But anyway, back to the book. So this is part of a 3-book series. This was the first one that he wrote, and then the other 2 came later. The other ones are Show Your Work and Keep Going. But Steal Like an Artist is the first one, and it's all about where good ideas come from and just principles and ways of thinking that will help you break free from whatever's really inhibiting you from creating. So the idea is steal like an artist. So you take ideas from others, but do it in a way that expresses your own unique point of view. It's not just about taking things from people, but about kind of remixing ideas into something that's really, really unique for you. And I think that's the difference between blind copying and actually really just taking inspiration and using it to express your own lens on the world. I'm also reading another book called Wanting by Luke Burgess right now. I actually have kind of mixed feelings about the book itself, but he talks about how humans are really imitative creatures, that really we've evolved to imitate each other, and that a lot of our actual desires, what we want, is really just a result of seeing what other people want, and then we want the same things, which is a really interesting concept. The book, I feel like I'm not like totally crazy about it, but I think the ideas behind it are really, really interesting. And I think what's important is using that desire to imitate in order to also innovate, not just copy. And I think that's something that Steal Like an Artist really gets into and really does a beautiful job of kind of showing through different dimensions. And it encourages you to really come up with your own view of the world, to get ideas from unexpected places, and then to, like I said, remix them in your own way. And it's also a very short book, very short, small book, easy to read, easy to flip through, easy to kind of reference and go back to over and over again. It's got a lot of illustrations in it that Austin Kleon does and incorporates into his books. So it's a really fun way to kind of process these ideas and return to them again and again. So that's the first book that I wanted to share. The next one is The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. And this book was really just such a life changer for me. I absolutely love this book. So one of the ideas in this book that has really stuck with me is that Julia says that we're like radios, and we need to set aside time to both receive and to broadcast our creativity. So she has some really specific practices that you can implement to do that. So she has ways where you can receive input. So one of these ways is she calls it an artist date. So that's scheduling time to just kind of feed your creativity in a new way, and to do that every week, which I think is a really cool idea. And then we also need time to kind of broadcast out, and to not just to create like finished work, but to get all of our ideas out of our bodies, out of our brains, and onto paper. So she has some rituals for that, like morning pages, which is really just a free writing session that you do first thing in the morning. And that's something that I have done for years, off and on. I'm not super religious about it, but when I do it, it is just so helpful and really helps me to process not just how I'm feeling, but what's coming up for me, like what's in my subconscious, what is something that maybe I haven't really been thinking about, but it's there in the back of my mind, and just kind of get that out. And that can really spark a lot of new ideas for me. So if you want some really practical steps to feeling more creative, I think you're going to love The Artist's Way. So if you haven't read The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron, definitely pick that one up. So the next one I want to talk about is a book that is a little bit different because it is specifically about one way of expressing yourself, but I think it applies to a lot of different ways. So that is Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain by Betty Edwards. And the reason it's different is because this is a book about drawing specifically, drawing pictures, but it's so much more than that. And it's one of those books that, even though it's on this kind of specific subject, it's really changed the way I think in a lot of ways. So let me tell you a little bit about it. So Betty Edwards says that the reason adults have so much trouble drawing is because our brains really get in the way. And instead of drawing what our eye actually sees, we try to draw how it's supposed to look in our brains. So our left brain has this really great ability to think abstractly. But because of that, when someone tells us to draw a face, for example, we draw sort of a symbol of what a nose or an eye looks like instead of what we see in front of us. So we're really good at kind of coming up with very quick symbols for things and not actually seeing the full reality that's in front of us, which is something that takes more right brain thinking. So sometimes you really have to shut off certain parts of your brain, even if those parts of your brain are generally very helpful in life. You kind of have to shut them off in order to see clearly and really see what's in front of you. And I just think this is such an interesting idea. And I think it's something that as I've learned more and more about how the brain works and how the two hemispheres of the brain work, especially, I have just been really fascinated by this concept and how much time we spend living in this left side of our brain, which really does not take in the full range of human experience. And I just think this is absolutely fascinating. So over time, I've developed a few ways that I can do that. I can kind of shut off those parts of my brain a little bit and get more into that right side thinking. And sometimes that's with physical activity. That's something that really grounds me and makes me feel present. Sometimes it's meditation, sometimes it's journaling. These things might be different for you, but I think having some processes you can go through that kind of help you to shift your thinking a little bit is super, super helpful. And this also, like I said, it just really got me to learn more about the two hemispheres of the brain. And that's really just transformed the way I think about life in a lot of ways. And if that's something you're interested in as well, one of the best books I've ever read was Ian McGilchrist's masterpiece, The Master and His Emissary, which is really about the way the left and the right brain work and also about how that's kind of affected society as a whole and how it's sort of a vicious cycle of people relying so much on their left brain and creating a world around them that really emphasizes the left brain instead of the right. So that's another really great book. It's not specifically about creativity, but I do recommend Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain by Betty Edwards. If you're interested in drawing, it's great. If you haven't drawn in years, it's also great. It takes you through some really simple drawing exercises that will really help you to see what's in front of your face a lot more easily. So I absolutely love that book. It's just one of my favorites. All right, the next one I wanted to talk about is a book called Make Time for Creativity by Brandon Stossy. Stossy is Stosuy. And again, we'll put links to all of these in the show notes. But this is a really fun one. So this one describes itself as a self-guide. So it's more of a workbook, and it takes you through a bunch of different dimensions of creativity with lots of interesting quotes and ideas to get you thinking. And it's also full of prompts. So there are all these questions for you to fill out with room to write your own answers right there in the book. So it's really useful if you enjoy journaling and you want to really construct a creative practice of any kind for yourself. So this one is just really, really practical. And I think it's nice because it really digs into the things that might be stopping you from making time for yourself, making time for your creative hobbies, for your creative practice. Maybe it's for your creative work. But I absolutely enjoy coming back to this book over and over again whenever I'm starting to feel that kind of crush of not having time for the things that really matter to me. So highly recommend that book as well. And then the last book that I really wanted to recommend to you is something that's kind of new to me. I just picked this up pretty recently, and it's called Do Interesting by Russell Davies. So this is another very short book, and it's also very practical and very actionable. So that's something that I really like about a lot of these books. And it's really about doing more interesting things. But to me, it's really a book about being creative. So it's divided into 3 parts: noticing, collecting, and sharing. And so in each part, there are ideas and exercises that you can do that'll help you to, for example, notice more, to collect what you notice, and then to share it in interesting ways with the world. And it has a lot of exercises you can do for each of those. And I love how simple, how practical it is, how there are all these creative, cool little things that you can do just in your day-to-day life that don't necessarily take very much time, that'll help you to notice life around you a lot more and in some new and different ways. And really, I think that's a lot of what creativity is just noticing more and making connections where you wouldn't have otherwise made connections. So I think this book will give you a ton of new ideas for new side projects and hobbies maybe, but it'll also help you to see the world a little differently and to do things just for the sake of self-expression and exploration, not necessarily because there's some big grand goal involved in it. And I think that's something that's really easy to overlook are those little exercises that we can do that just help us to be more creative, to see more of what's around us, and really feed the rest of our creativity and the other things that we do more regularly. So that's another really great one. And I'll summarize all these for you. So I mentioned 5 books today. So I'll start at the top here. The first one was Steal Like an Artist by Austin Kleon. And then if you like that book, I also recommend Show Your Work and Keep Going, which are the second and third books in this series. And again, also highly recommend Austin Kleon's newsletter. The second one was The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. Absolutely a classic, one of my favorite books. I love this book. Number 3, Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain by Betty Edwards, which taught me a lot about how the brain works and where creativity comes from. Make Time for Creativity by Brandon Stossy. So this one is really more of a workbook about making time in your life for creativity. And then finally, Do Interesting by Russell Davies, which is a book largely about noticing things, collecting the things you've noticed, and then finding ways to share what you've noticed. It's a little bit of a different perspective on creativity, but very, very practical with lots of cool exercises in it. So those are the 5 books that if you haven't read them yet, I highly recommend. I think they've all been really instrumental for me and really helpful for me. And even just looking at them makes me feel like being more creative. It makes me want to get out there and do something different, to put down my phone and just enjoy my creativity and do something, like I said, just for the sake of exploration, the sake of kind of seeing life in a different way. So I find that really, really inspiring. I also wanted to mention, if you're not signed up yet, you can get our free weekly Snippets newsletter, which also has lots of creative ideas. We send out a short list of actionable, creative ideas that you can use in your sewing each week. We send out 5 ideas and how to do them every week. And I just love this new version of Snippets. It's such a joy to write, and it'll really help you to spend more time sewing and less time scrolling. We've got over 200,000 subscribers to Snippets. You can get it for free at getsnippets.com. And if you liked this episode, we would really appreciate it if you would leave us a review on your podcast platform of choice. 5-star review really, really helps other people to discover the podcast. So I wanted to read this one, which came from Captain Kanga, just talking about the 5 outfit formula episode. I love this episode because it gave really practical advice. Actually, I love your podcast because it is so practical. Thank you. Oh, thank you so much, Captain Kanga. What a nice review. And if you would like to leave us a review, please, we would super, super appreciate it. And we'll probably read it on a future episode if you do. So let us know what you think of the show. You can also find us on YouTube at Seamwork Video. You can find us on Instagram at Seamwork. And if you'd like to join Seamwork and become part of our private community, plus get access to hundreds of sewing patterns and dozens of sew-along classes, our podcast listeners get a 50% off lifetime discount when you join at seamwork.com/go/podcast50. So that's seamwork.com/go/podcast50. I'm Sari, and that wraps us up for this week. And this is Seamwork Radio. Seamwork Radio is brought to you by the team at Seamwork. Seamwork's an online community that supports you in creating a wardrobe that feels right for you. When you join us at Seamwork, you become part of our private community of makers, and you also get access to monthly sew-along classes, a library of over 200 sewing patterns, and tons of great resources to help guide you through the sewing adventure that you choose. Podcast listeners can get half off a Seamwork Unlimited membership, which means you can download as many of those 200 plus patterns as you want at any time, and our community will be there to guide and support you. If you'd like to join us for half off, just visit seamwork.com/go/podcast50. You can also find us on Instagram at Seamwork or visit our YouTube channel, which is called Seamwork Video. We love hearing from you, so let us know if there's a topic or a personal story that you'd like us to cover. Thanks for listening to Seamwork Radio.